All right, so I'm gonna get this party started. Thank you for coming to my session. This is my first time using a PowerPoint in maybe 2 decades. So I don't even know if your students and the students there are even familiar with PowerPoint.
Yeah, we're having to use PowerPoint. The teachers, we're having to use it a lot too. So we're fine with PowerPoint.
Okay, cool. Well, so I'm calling this Beyond the Scoreboard, keeping local sports relevant, because this is who I am. I even put these cool little transitions on here because I had so much fun.
Look at the transitions.
So my name's Chris Womack. I'm the sports director at WLOS TV here in Asheville, North Carolina, but our viewing area also extends down into the upstate of South Carolina, which includes Greenville and Spartanburg. The only major university that's in our viewing area is Clemson, but we also have UNC Asheville, Western Carolina, and some smaller colleges that we cover as well. I'm a graduate of the University of Alabama, and in case anybody forgets that, I have this on my desk. I hope I'm not talking to too many Auburn fans. I know that's always a risk when whenever you talk to people from Alabama.
Oh, we have an LSU fan.
Oh goodness, that's even worse. All right, well, we'll pray for you, okay? So as sports director, my duties include anchoring our 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. sportscasts Monday through Friday. In addition, I'm what's called a multimedia journalist, which means I shoot, write, and edit almost all of my own stories. I also have to create content for our station website and be as active as possible on social media. I'm pretty good on Twitter. I'm not very good on Facebook. I do my best, but
I try to stay away from Facebook.
Well, you know,
because it can be such an awful thing.
A vapid wasteland. Yeah. So before I came here to WLOS, I did work at CBS 42 in Birmingham, as I mentioned. I was there for 7 years. And the first 4 years, I was a news MMJ. And then the last 3, I served as a sports producer. But I would also do stories every now and then, mainly features. I didn't get to do much game coverage, which led to me coming here for different opportunities. Woo. So if your students don't mind chiming in here, I just want to know, what do they think local sports means?
What is local sports? Yeah. How would you define local sports? Like it says, oh, check out local sports coverage. What would you expect to find there? In the area?
So maybe like high school, like team like spring, I mean like the city. That'd be local. Like
yeah. Okay. County sports. Yeah.
So the way I'm going to define it is anything that isn't readily available anywhere else.
Okay.
So if you think, so here's kind of how we cover things. I look at high school sports, college sports, and then the feature. So high school, obviously St. Clair falls into that category, you know, and all the surrounding areas. College sports, in a market like yours, you obviously have the University of Alabama, and most of the stations, if not all of them, cover Auburn equally as much. So I would look at local, because Alabama and Auburn, you're going to find them on ESPN. You're going to find them everywhere on the internet. There's a billion different places that you can get SEC coverage, but you cannot get Samford everywhere. You cannot get UAB everywhere. You cannot get Jacksonville State everywhere. And so I think that the local television stations have an obligation to bring those stories and those teams to their viewers. You can't ignore Alabama and Auburn. That's obvious. You have to cover them. But you do need to realize that there are other schools out there that are playing really high level competition that need to be seen by your viewers. All right, so where do I find story ideas? I think that's probably the biggest challenge, and the question that I get asked the most is, where do you find stories? Because it seems like this insurmountable task that, you know, every day you've got to somehow pull a rabbit out of a hat and find this great story. I do it by keeping my eyes and ears open. And what I mean by that, by the way, enjoy that beautiful sunset from one of our local soccer teams. Up here in the mountains, we get some absolutely gorgeous weather. So the first example I'm going to give you is a story that I did on a basketball player named Sonora Danook. Sonora played at the UNC Asheville. She was an all-conference guard. And when I first moved here, I was working for our old sports director who just recently retired. And he said, go to UNC Asheville practice. Let's do a preseason preview. Make sure you get a lot of video of Sonora Danook. Well, when I got there and I'm looking at the roster and I see what her number is, and I'm looking out on the court and I don't see her there. And I'm thinking, that's strange. She was all conference last year. She was their leading scorer. Like, where did she go? So I got on the Twitter machine and I looked up Sonora and I found out why she was not there. She was pregnant with a child. And so she was a freshman when she got pregnant. She had the baby and the team welcomed her back. And so I did a story on how she was balancing being a student athlete and a mom. And I only found that because I noticed she wasn't there. So another good example before I get to the main one is, so the other day, actually on a Tuesday night, I was at a high school basketball game and it was senior night for them. And, you know, I was just kind of on my phone scrolling through Twitter because I had already gotten a couple shots of the seniors and I was just waiting for the game to start. And they called a young man's name and the place erupted. And the PA announcer started crying when he was reading, you know, the bio about him. And so as soon as warm-up started, I went over to the announcer and I asked him, hey, what's the deal? You know, I heard you all get really excited and emotional about that Elijah kid. And he teared up again and he said, well, he's homeless. He doesn't have any parents in the picture. And he was living with his grandfather who just passed away 3 days ago. So right now he has nowhere to live. And so we're going to be doing that story. But again, I found it just by noticing what was going on around me. So here's the example. And I'm going to use this kind of as my jumping off tool for the rest of the session. Back when, gosh, I guess it was October of 2017, I had been here for about 3 months. And a couple of my coworkers went down to South Carolina because there was some fundraiser for a police officer who had been killed in the line of duty at a local racetrack. And while they were there, James Plemons rolled up to him and said, hey, are y'all here to do a story about me? And they kind of laughed. And then James stood up and you will see why we decided, yes, we are here to do a story about you. I ended up going down there a couple weeks later to do it. Now, Mary, I've always had a little audio issue when I'm playing videos, so let me know if y'all can hear this when it starts.
We're used to technological issues. It's okay. We go with whatever, you know. We're fine.
All right, so here we go. Can y'all hear that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Good morning, Brian. Coming to distance.
Deep in our hearts, we all want to prove our worth.
No, let's play bowling. I'll get us a bowl and put it back in there.
Sometimes we're driven to prove it to others.
I mean, you got to have some guts and no fear.
Other times, we simply want to prove it to ourselves.
He really likes racing. He puts a lot into it.
He
Where you gonna watch that going from?
is James Plemons, whose heart lies in the middle of a dirt circle.
Let's keep it tight. It's up to the inside man to start the race. His nickname of it is the Darlington of Dirt.
Plemons catches eyes every time he gets behind the wheel. Not because of how he finishes.
Yeah, kind of admire somebody like James, where the guys that us that race is, you know, got used to both our legs.
Scared people never really change the world.
Plemons Clemens used to drive like everyone else, but then life sent him down a detour.
I think I do well for the circumstances, but
Clemens, who also works as a mechanic, was preparing to tow a car that had been pulled over for a DUI when another drunk driver came up and smashed his truck.
it shoved the truck onto asphalt about 20 foot with me under it. So it basically acted like a grinder and ground that extremity off of it.
For a moment, it seemed like more than just his racing days were over.
I bled out twice that night. Took 15 pints of blood. So that's bleeding out twice. Body holds about 8 pints.
But Clemens handles life like a driver has to handle a track.
And each time you go to a dirt track, it's different. It's never the same. It'll change 2 or 3 times while you're there.
So he rolled up his sleeves and figured out a way.
27, and because there's just no quit in it. There's no quit in it. You know, you dealt life, dealt cards in life.
Because every time you think you're at a dead end, if you follow your heart, it may just be an opportunity to try a new way.
You got to keep going. You know, you got 2 options: live or die.
In Lawrence County with photojournalist Jordan Powell, Chris Womack, News 13 Sports. All right, so we titled that story "No Quit in Me" because of the obvious. Now, after watching that and what you already kind of feel and think about sports and local sports and coverage of stuff, what makes a good story? This is where you talk.
Yeah. Well, to me, one thing that we talk about in yearbook is that you don't want you want the yearbook to be specific to that year.
Mhm.
You want things that are happening just that year. So if you pick up that book, it's specific to that year. It's not just a general story. And so sometimes in sports, it's hard to kind of get that angle because you want to try to cover the season and not just monopolize like one person with that story. But sometimes that's hard to do. And then, okay, here's one of our, maybe you can help us with this.
Yeah.
A lot of our sports teams, I'm just going to be candid, are not good. I mean, we don't have, okay, I mean, I don't, look, I'm a Saints fan. I'll always be a Saints fan. But sometimes in yearbook, we're not going to lie. I mean, we're not going to like make stuff up. But sometimes it's hard to find that good angle, you know, that to find.
And I think where the unique advantage that your students will have is that those are their classmates. So it's going to be easier for the players on those teams to talk to them as opposed to you or I, because, adults there's just this communication and just generational gap that it's hard for us to understand and for them to feel comfortable talking to us. So I think where you can solve that problem is just with the yearbook staff getting to know the athletes and finding out what have they overcome.
One of our yearbook people, she's a sports trainer too.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah. So I mean, you obviously have a lot of conversations with them probably, and you got to be a little careful being a trainer. You don't want to violate like HIPAA laws or anything like that. But I think that once you get to know those guys and gals, you can say, hey, do you mind sharing that story? Because you're exactly right. A win-loss record is not exactly the story of a season.
Yeah.
It's all the kids and coaches that make up that season. If they're 0-12 on the football field, why are they 0-12? What are they dealing with off the field? There's all kinds of stories there. So since you're a yearbook staff, I know that a lot of what I have in this presentation is probably not germane. But are any of y'all interested in television in the future, by the way?
I want to be an actor. Like for commercials and stuff, like a voice.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's one route. So I don't get to do commercials a lot. They keep us separate from those people so that we don't get into ethical dilemmas. So I don't have much to offer there. But let me power through the rest of this PowerPoint, and maybe, you know what, maybe one of y'all gets an interest in working in local news from it. So
We need to improve our sports stuff because, I mean, I know realistically, those are some of the pages they're gonna go to first when we pass out the yearbooks.
yeah, okay. And see, I think
Great results on the field. I mean, our community is all about sports.
right. They're there, win, lose, or draw. So think about this. This could actually be germane to what y'all do. Think about story structure. So when you're talking about those teams, a good story has, in my mind, at least three things: a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so what I mean by that, the beginning is the introduction to the setting or the team, the subject, the particular player. You know, make us care about that person. Tell me, you know, does he make everybody laugh? Does she do a lot of work in the community for charities and everything? So just connect me with your subject. Then the middle is going to be the issue, the problem, the setback, the hurdle, the losses on the field, the star player that got injured in the first game. You know, there's got to be some kind of controversy or some kind of conflict. You know, you hear that a lot, and probably in English class. You know, there's got to be a conflict. The end is going to be your resolution. So if you look back at the story that I just showed y'all, and again, I know that you can't exactly put a video in the yearbook, but we introduced you to James, told you how much he loves dirt track racing, told you about him losing his leg, then showed you how he overcame it. So that is, you know, I think at the very base, a good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Characters, let them be the star. So this is another thing that actually is relevant to what you do. I think a lot of times we as reporters and journalists and maybe even writers on the yearbook, we get kind of caught up in the flowery language and writing this wonderful story that, you know, shows off our ability to construct prose and everything. Well, we don't need to take the shine away from the people we're talking about. They are why people are reading that story. They are why people are watching that story. Now, that doesn't mean mail it in when you're doing an article or anything like that. But just remember, I like to let our people, our characters, tell us in their own words. And I do that by avoiding yes or no questions. Because guess what? Especially with high school athletes, if you give them an opportunity to say yes or no, they're going to say yes or no. They, you know, if you say, gosh, you know, are you worried about the next game? No. Well, darn. Now, how can you get that same thought differently? What concerns you about the next game? What types of challenges does Clay Chalkville pose? Different things like that. Look for context. So our job is to provide the facts in the best way possible. Let them tell us what it feels like, because I don't think it's up to me to tell you that James losing his leg was a traumatic experience that altered his life and all that. I'll let James tell you about that because he's the one that went through it. Don't be afraid to be a little funny sometimes. I mean, I think humor is one of the best tools that we have in our array, is because people connect to humor. They like to laugh. It makes you like someone a little bit more if you feel like you can laugh with them. So this is another one that can, I guess maybe I was thinking of Yearbook when I put this PowerPoint together. So when you're getting shots, now, yes, I do video, you do stills, but all video is 30 stills per second. That's all it is. I'm taking pictures just rapidly, right one after the other. So when you're taking pictures or shooting video, if, you know, maybe you do an online type of thing, think about shooting in angles. What angles do is they draw your eye into the setting, especially if you can find what we call leading lines. So a leading line, you see this fence line right across there, across the track, it brings your eye into the picture and really encapsulates it. for everything that happens, there's an action, which is what happens, and there's a reaction. This dude, waving his fist, he's watching the cars go around. That's just as integral a part of dirt track racing as the actual cars going around the track. Sequencing is that's a video thing, so I'll just skip over that. Now, this is probably something you stress to the students. Think about wide, medium, and tight shots, because you need something to set the scene, which is your wide shot. Mediums, I would actually characterize this, what I have, this picture over here, as a medium, which it doesn't give you the perspective of the one that says shooting angles, but it's wide enough that you can kind of see what's going on. Now, tight shots, what's going on here with sequencing, that would be a tight shot in my opinion. Now, with sequencing, if you do get into video, I'll just touch on it briefly. This picture of when he's going over the tire, you can tell that is that we put these shots back to back, but you can tell if you look closely at the tire in the medium shot, he's further along on that tire than in this setting over in the tight shot. Look for stuff that happens over and over again where you can put sequences together. You could use his feet as he's bouncing back and forth, his face as the dust is kicking up off the tires, he's sanding it off. And that helps you tell a story a little bit better, because life is really just a bunch of sequences. That's all it is at the end of the day. So this is video specific, so I'm going to just skip over that. All right, so I know I probably didn't give you the best yearbook tutorial or advice ever, but please feel free to ask any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them from my perspective.
Any questions?
For like yearbook purposes, I know that's not your specialty, but like when we write a story for our sports section, we can't really like focus on like one person or their one struggle, because we usually do that as like a spotlight type deal. So like how would we like make a full story about the full team and kind of like have that like beginning, middle, and end, and it like, like draw the reader in and stuff like that.
So I think if we look at this year specifically, and I know Alabama has much different COVID guidelines than we do here in North Carolina. For example, like our athletes, every athlete, when they're playing, they have to wear a face covering, whether it's football or basketball or soccer or anything, they have to play in masks. Our football season actually starts in about 2 weeks. They canceled it for the fall. So if I'm completely like off base here, with what's going on in Alabama, please forgive me. But I think if you look at the year 2020, 2021, I mean, the beginning is obvious, is COVID. I mean, it changed the world. It made sports less important. It put a lot of struggles on a lot of people. Every kid on those teams had some kind of issue with COVID, whether they had it or not. Their family was affected in some way. So I think you introduce just the weirdness of the world that we live in and the sports calendar. And then what kind of challenges did that pose to training, to game prep? Did players quit? That's kind of your conflict right there. And then the resolution, again, I think in this year, whether St. Clair won 12 games or if they lost 12 games, just getting through the season is a victory. Yeah. So I think that when you write and you think about, maybe it's not so much about the wins and losses as much as it is the journey. Because again, if you just throw a bunch of stats out there like, oh, Tommy Thomas threw for 200 yards in this game, but he also had 4 interceptions.